Hello everyone, welcome to my first video on how to hack the Nintendo Game & Watch so you can play homebrew games and stuff like that on it. Here's a already hacked Nintendo Game & Watch that you can see here. It has one of my favorite games on it, Rad Racer, NES game, and it runs perfectly. It has sound, buttons work, everything works. So we're going to show you guys how to make one of these work from a brand new Nintendo Game & Watch. Okay, so what you guys will need: Game & Watch, obviously, some type of wire strippers. I use these wire cutters here, like side cutter type things. Anything will do. You could even use scissors, really, but I wouldn't recommend it. Trihexyl screwdriver, I think that's how you say it. It's like a triangle shaped screwdriver. It's to open your Game & Watch. And I'll link everything in the description for you guys, just in case you don't know where to get this stuff. So what I've used is a STM32 F103 Nucleo board. This board is what you're going to need to communicate with your Game & Watch and then hack it through the Linux that we're going to use later in the computer room. But for now, we're just going to show you guys how to solder up the debug ports on your Nintendo Game & Watch so you can plug it in to talk to your STM32 Nucleo board. Also get a cheap clone of these boards on Amazon, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so, and also I use these tweezers too. They're like fine tip tweezers, metal tweezers. Just good to hold wires and stuff like that. Okay, so what I've used here, it's kind of a crude setup for this wire setup I have here. But what I've used is something that I got out of an old computer. It's a 4-pin connector. You guys can see it there. It says speaker on it, but that's just because I ripped it out of an old computer. It's probably used for the speaker, obviously. So this is going to be the cable I'm going to use to plug to our STM32 board to talk to our Game & Watch. So what I've done here is there's obviously 4 leads. So I took the 4 leads and I made them into connections to plug into my Game & Watch. It's kind of a crude connection, but you guys can do something differently if you want. The only connectors I had were these 3-pin connectors, so I used this. It just kind of plugs in and out. I'll show you guys later when I'm actually doing it, but that's a 3-pin connector. We need 4 in total for what I'm doing today, so I just found this random pin connector. I know it's not the best, but it works for what we're doing. So you need 4 pins in total, so that's what my pins look like. Okay? But to connect to the board, that's what it looks like there. Okay, so let's open up this STM32 board. That side there. So here's your nice little board here. So for us, we're using STlink, something called STlink. So you guys can see it there. We need to take these jumpers off to activate the STlink. So I'm just going to pull these jumpers right off because we don't need them. It's going to look like that. So the STlink is not jumped. Okay. So we'll put this over here for now. So this cable that I was talking about earlier, my little speaker cable, not actually a speaker cable, but that's what I'm calling it, because it says speaker on it. So we want to take this one, and if you look here on our Nucleo board, it says SWD. You see it right there where my index finger is. So these pins here are what we're going to be using. Pretty much everything else on the board we're not really looking at, we're just looking at these pins here. So the top pin, I think the top pin's for power, but we're not using power. So we're going to use the pin underneath of it, and then this pin underneath that one, and then this pin underneath that one, and then this pin underneath that one. So there's 4 pins in total. We're not using the top one, we're not using the bottom one. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can see that. So we're not using the top one, we're not using the bottom one. So the way that my plug-in here goes, it would plug in just like that. And I know it might be a little bit confusing right now, but I'm not using the top pin, and I'm not using the bottom pin, and I just plugged all those 4 connectors right into the middle. So I got those 4 pins in the middle, minus the top, minus the bottom. And let's tell you what those pins are right now. So that's how I like that connection, because it's on the board properly. Well, I wouldn't say properly, but best way I have it. And it's not really going anywhere. So that's how I have that. So we need to get these wires correct. So as you can see, I have a black wire, a white wire, another black wire, and a red wire. It's obviously going to be different for whatever you have. So I'm going to match it up for what I have. So black, white, black, and red. I'll probably fast forward this stuff, but maybe not. But I'm going to open up the Game & Watch. It's brand new too, so I haven't even touched this thing. Okay guys, so I paused the feed for a bit while I open this thing up, because you don't really need to see that. But here it is, brand new Game & Watch. I'll turn it on just so you can see. I've never turned it on before. So there it is, the Game & Watch, like you would pull it out of the package. So what we're going to do, leave our STM32 board aside for now. I know I was going to talk about where these wires go to, but we'll talk about that after I open this thing up. And I forgot to mention that obviously you're going to need some type of, I think they're called alligator clips or lead connectors that go onto the debug port. You're going to need something like that, or you're going to need to solder connections like we're going to do today. So I'm going to show you how to solder the connections on, using obviously a solder gun or soldering iron and solder. So what you guys are going to need is to grab your triangle screwdriver, trihexyl screwdriver, I'm assuming is what it's called, I don't know for sure. And there is 4 screws in each corner. Sorry, a screw in each corner, so 4 screws in total. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Show you guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to unscrew those. Oops. Okay, so I took the 4 screws out, put those aside for now, and the back plate should pop off. Mind the power button here, because that'll fall out if you're not careful. So I'm just going to use my fingernails here and pull the back plate off. It'll come right off, there's nothing attached to it. So here's the back plate of the Nintendo Game & Watch. And if you look closely, you'll see the debug port here that they left for us. So it actually still talks to the board, and these are the ports that we're going to be using to talk to the board and reflash it with custom firmware. Okay, so what I like to do first, disconnect the battery. So if you look here, oops, sorry, there is the battery connection, and you just gotta pull up on the connector, as so, and then I'll disconnect the battery. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys on my phone what the debug connector ports, and I'll also link this in the description, but that's what the ports are. Sorry for wiggling, just trying to get a good clear picture. And this diagram shows you exactly how to connect it up to this board, our STM32 board. So like I said, I'm going to link this picture up, or have it come up on the screen bigger for you guys. But this is what I'm going off of to figure out where these where the debug ports actually go onto our STM32 board. So this is the diagram I'm going to be using. This is what you guys want to be following when you're either soldering or using those alligator clips to clip onto the debug port. Okay? Okay, so my soldering iron should be heated up by now. And like I said before, this is what your alligator clips are going to clip to, or this is what you're going to solder to. If you look at it closely, where my index finger is, we're using that one. We're not using the second one in, and then we're using all three of the others. So there's one that we're actually not using. Well, I'm not using. I know you can use for different setups, but that's not the one I'm going to be using. Okay, so I'm going to put the solder on where it needs to go. I'm going to pause it for a minute and then restart the video. Okay, I had to stop the video for a minute just to change my memory card on the camera. And while I was doing that, I kind of resoldered all the points on the debug port. So if you're soldering, that's what it's going to look like there. So I've soldered 4 of them in total. As you can see, the second last one there I didn't solder because it's the one that we're not going to use today. I believe it's called the VDD, which is for power. But our STM32 board here doesn't need that. The other cheap cheap ST32 ones you get from like Amazon and stuff, they may need that power, but we're not going to be using that today. So what we have here, we have our 4-pin connector, which goes to our leads here, which I have a 3-pin connector and then another pin to add because I don't have a 4-pin connector. So there's our makeshift 4-pin connector. Oh, I'm sorry, it goes like this. This is our 4-pin connector that I've made. The colors don't matter. So as you can see, like, well, the colors do matter, but if the way I have it set up, the colors don't matter because I just kind of set it up this way. If you want to set it up nicer and make it look neat, then by all means do that. But this is what I've done to make it work, and it works for me. So the first one I have is going to be the top one here, and it's, if you can see there, as I said earlier, we're not using the first. We're not using that first peg there, we're using the second one. So we're going to plug in our lead to the second one there. And if you have the 4-pin connector like I do, it just goes 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're not using the 6th pin. So there's 6 pins in total. We're not using the first one, and we're not using the last one, which would be the 6th pin. So you see mine there. I'm going to set up this black wire first, because it's the first wire in line there, and I'd put it to this connector here. And ultimately you could just solder wires straight to the board, but we might as well have some type of connectors so we can keep plugging it back in to put different games on it. So, sorry, I'm just going to move some stuff out of the way here. So what we want to do is look at our thing here, and it'll tell us where these wires are going to go. Okay, so we have SWCLK. We're not using VDD. We have ground, SWDIO, and NRST. So those are the ones we're going to be dealing with. There's 4 in total. We want to make sure we get these pins proper onto our STM32 board. If I zoom out here, you can see that's a diagram of our STM32 board telling us exactly where to put our pins onto our debug port. Okay, I'm going to link this in my description. And all we're going to do is solder these connections on. I'm not the best at soldering, but I can get the job done. So some tip here. Some on the wire. So we get our wire tinned up nice. I'm not very good at that, but it works when I do. So there you go. I'm going to pause the video for now, do these connections, and then show you guys the connections and go from there. And after that, we're going to go into the computer room and show you guys how to use Linux, Ubuntu, to load up games onto the Game & Watch. And I'm going to show you guys how to load it from scratch on a VM virtual machine on Windows. So if you guys are just users on Windows and you're not very familiar, or you want to get to know Linux, I guess I'll show you guys how to get started and hack your Game & Watch. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I've soldered all the connections onto my Game & Watch, and I'll show you guys that here now. I actually made a mistake, and I'm not the best at soldering, like I said earlier. The last pin there, if you can see, I actually burnt it off. So yeah, you want to be careful when you're soldering, because it's very delicate board and they're really tiny connections on the debug ports. So I just had to flip that board over and use the pin, or the port on the bottom of the board, or sorry, on the back of the board, and that worked for me. Well, it should work. And this Game & Watch, after all these connections are done, should still turn on. So if you want to plug your battery in to test, just plug mine in, push the power button, and it's still on. Well, it's still working. So remove our power, because I was just testing to see if the thing still works after all our connections. And let's take a look at our connections here. The colors don't match up for me, so ignore the colors. But this is what our debug port connection looks like. That's going to talk to our STM32 board, which is going to talk to Linux and put games onto our Nintendo Game & Watch. Eventually, keep watching. I'll show you guys how to do that. So, I'm not going to show you guys where each pin goes. Just make sure that you have it wired up properly. It's just a general video on showing you guys how to do this. I'm not going to go through every little every pin. I kind of already showed you guys earlier, but the way the mine's set up, just make sure that your pins are proper. We're using pins 2, 3, 4, and 5. Remember, we're not using the 6th pin and we're not using the 1st pin. And all my wires are connected properly to the debug ports. Okay, so this board, my STM32 Nucleo board, is talking, well, will be able to talk to my Game & Watch. And this thing plugs in through USB. Uses one of those old school USB connectors. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video for now, and then we're going to go into my computer room, and I'm going to have a video of this thing going while I do my work on the computer, and then I'll screen record the computer. So I'll be right back.